sponsors of the work that ERSA does. They have sponsored a series of events at ERSA in this year, and we are really grateful for that, because we've had to be more active, adapting being online, and do a whole range of things differently. And Cognisoft have really supported us in doing that. So I'd just like to hand over to Emma, who I think has also got a very short video for us. So, okay, thanks. Over to Emma.
Thank you, Liz. As Liz said, we've actually supported ERSA, I think, for something getting around for 10 years now. We have been involved in employability, skills, advice and guidance for getting on for 30 years. The organisation itself is 35 years old. We started off a long time ago with youth and adult training back in the days of YTS and the job training schemes. So we've been here an awful long time in this sector. We started specifically with the employability sector in 2000 with, back then it was New Deal and the employment zones programs. But prior to that, we'd done an awful lot of work and supplied systems for career services and connection services going back into the early 90s. So everything that we've done around systems, we provide case management systems and management information, has been in this sector around information, advice, guidance and skills. We've delivered, we've delivered the system for various DWP and ESF related funding streams for the last 20 years. We've been around in periods of high unemployment, so going back to the work programme and the employment zones programmes. But we've also maintained the work that we do in this sector through the recent years, where unemployment was much lower, but actually the issues and the problems were different, leading into in-work poverty and trying to improve people's work prospects and opportunities. So we've worked with an awful lot of providers across all sectors of big primes, local authorities, housing associations, as well as training providers. So we've been around a long time. We now also work with the National Careers Service, so we provide systems for 4 of the National Careers Service primes, hard to say, and we have done for both of the National Careers Service contracts over the last 5 years now. So everything we do is around learner and client journeys and being able to evidence what you do and how you do it. And that's the beauty of case management systems. It's being able to prove how you work with your client group, what works, and improving on what works because the data behind it supports it, but also giving your advisors real-time information about what they've been doing with their clients, and for your client, obviously, that sort of seamless integration of support that they get. So I'm not going to bore you for too long at this point. We've got, as Liz says, we do have a video. If somebody could start the video for me, it just explains a little bit about what we do and how our systems can help across the sectors.
Great, Adam.
Rules and new delivery models, subcontractors and supply chains to manage, remote working and the rise in unemployment, all create an increasingly uncertain and complex landscape. And managing all that information in lots of different places can leave you feeling a little out of sync. That's why we created Yeti Infinity. More than 35 years in the making, Yeti Infinity combines all the best bits of our management information software with the power of new productivity tools for your whole team to put you in control of your universe. Yeti Infinity is your central hub for managing multiple people, looking after your data, keeping track of client conversations and controlling your communications, all in one place. that you can access anytime, anywhere, from any platform or device, keeping the whole team connected and your service users on track. What's more, we know that every organisation is different. That's why Yeti Infinity is designed to be scalable and flexible, so you can build a solution to fit your world, choosing only the blocks you need, saving you money as well as time. Plus, Yeti Infinity is easy to use and simple to set up for the whole team. You see, we've been around since 1984, the first of our kind, building helpful products and software for people like you to keep track of your service users. Over the last 35 years, we've responded to every big shift in education, policy, and technology to make sure our products are simple, secure, reliable, and efficient. Today, thousands of users trust us to do the technical bit so they can do what they do best. So let us get your world in balance and be best in class for your service users with Yeti Infinity.
Hey, thank you. I can now see that I think we lost some people. We've got everybody back in. I think we've got over 200 people online. So I'd like to hand over to Nick Riddle, who is the Deputy Director from the DWP, who is leading on the Kickstart Programme. Nick will, in this session, talk to us about the entire intention of Kickstart and some details about the role of the Job Centre Plus work coach. We'll take the break just before 11 and then come back to Nick. We've given him 2 hours. We are not expecting Nick to speak for 2 hours, but we're giving him the chance to give us some information, for us to ask some questions, take the break at 11, come back to Nick, have a short comfort break, come back to Nick again. We know we're going to put him through his paces, and I think that if he...
Well, and a really, really good morning to everyone. And thank you, Elizabeth and others, for inviting me to come along today. As Elizabeth said, you've got the pleasure of me, maybe, for a whole 2 hours. Now, I've absolutely no intention of talking for that amount of time. Mainly because it will get quite boring, and I'm guessing actually a number of you have signed up to ask lots of questions about the scheme. And so that's why I'm here. As Elizabeth has said, hopefully I'll be able to answer as many of your questions as I can. But if there is anything that I can't answer, then obviously I will take it away. So I guess just a little bit of an introduction about me. So I've been in the job for about 3 weeks, so it is still all a little bit of a baptism of fire, if I'm being completely honest. But in essence, my job is the day-to-day running of the scheme. So if you are an employer or a gateway organisation and you submit an application to DWP, then it will be my team that processes that application. It'll be my team that takes it through to the decision board to decide whether or not we'll award the grant. And it will be my team that will issue the grant agreements for signature, that will gather your vacancies. And similarly, it will be my team as well that will do the important stuff of paying you, whether or not you are an employer or a gateway. I will talk to you a bit about, I guess, the substantive content that I'm going to tell you about today. And although we have got 2 sessions, I do think they probably do intermingle into each other, if I'm being really honest. So in the first session, I am going to focus more on the scheme itself, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. But just one thing that I did want to say, which is we have had a lot of interest in the scheme, as colleagues on the call will probably anticipate, and that's great, right? Because what Elizabeth said at the beginning of the hour is really key. Everyone in this wants to make it the best that it can possibly be, and that includes DWP. We've stood the scheme up in very, very quick time. I think what we certainly acknowledge is that we want to work with organisations like ERSA and other stakeholders and employers to make the scheme the best that it can be. So if there are some unanswered questions, then that might very well be because actually that's something that we still need to think about and iterate and improve the process as we go. Now then, because of the level of interest in the scheme, that did mean that we had quite a number of challenges in terms of processing the applications that we got in the earlier days. We are now almost entirely up to date with any employer applications that are coming through. The gateway process is slightly more challenging because if you are an employer, then we have one application to assess. If you're a gateway organisation, then potentially you can be representing, you know, a significant number of employers. So what I would say is that it's easy for the man from DWP to say, yep, we think we're getting through it, we think we're more or less up to date. But if there are colleagues on the call who are concerned because you haven't heard from us, then my absolute open offer to any of you is please do reach out and get in touch with me. I know the session's being recorded, so I will just tell you what my email address is, because I wouldn't be able to give you any individual updates on this call about the status of an application. But if you guys want to email me separately, then I'm very, very happy to help in any way, shape or form. And similarly, I think it's important to make this offer as well. If people want to ask me questions and would actually like to spend a bit of time just chatting through either an application or any ideas that you guys might have, then I'm similarly really, really happy to do that. So my email address is a nice simple one. So it's nick.riddle, which is RIDDLE at dwp.gov.uk. So once more, that was nick.riddle at dwp.gov.uk. So let's then move on to a bit of the substantive content. So I'm going to talk to you about, I guess, 6 things in this session. Some of it might be a bit of a repeat, but I'm really conscious that we've got a lot of colleagues on the call, and it's a bit hard to know, I guess, exactly everyone's knowledge levels around Kickstart. So I'm going to touch, as I say, on 6 key areas. I'm going to touch on what the scheme is, because that's quite an important one. I'm going to touch on what's in it for employers. So what do employers get? I'm going to talk a bit about the application process. So what does that look like? And then I'm going to pause, I think, on how to put in a successful application. So what does good look like? I chair the decision board for Kickstart, where we see a sample of all of the applications that come in. And we, in essence, as a group, I guess, personally approve some of those and equally decline some of those where they're not of the right level of quality. But hopefully what I'll be able to do is to give you a bit of a flavour about how we assess an application. So what do we look at? And also, what does good look like in the context of an application? And I anticipate that we might get quite a lot of questions about that, and that's a really, really good use of time. Then I'm going to talk a bit about how the payments work, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the work coach. So I will rattle through this probably, but hopefully you guys get some good content out of it. And as I said, in the last part of the session, or in the second part, sorry, after we've observed the 2-minute silence, I will talk to you a bit more about the role of the gateway and what that looks like. So let's just cover then, I guess, the first of the elements. So what is Kickstart then? What it is there to do? So Elizabeth talked earlier about how, passionate she was, and that certainly came through about, improving the prospects of young people. And that equally applies to all of us, I know, on this call, and certainly all of us at DWP as well. And I don't have the most recent figures, colleagues, but if I remember rightly, the UK unemployment rate is something like 4%, and I think the unemployment rate of young people, sits, I think, around 12 or 13%. So there is obviously a real need to do something different and innovative in this space, and that is what Kickstart is supposed to be. So in essence, the scheme is there to help young people at risk of long-term unemployment get into the job market. And we do that, in essence, by providing government funding, which comes either direct from DWP or equally funneled through a gateway to an employer, for employers to create 6-month job placements. There are a number of routes in, so employers of all sizes and all sectors can be funded to offer these new roles, and that's a really key thing, and I will hone in on that, I guess, a little bit later in the session, which is they really do have to be new roles, and that's an absolutely core part of our assessment process, which is really testing and getting under the skin of whether these are new roles. And again, we'll talk a bit more about that. If an employer can only offer a limited number of vacancies, and that's a really important thing, and I'll touch on that as well, then the employer can apply via a gateway organisation to DWP, and then in essence they can still have their vacancies advertised via Job Centre Plus and then referred to via the work coach. I think the reason why us having that kind of tiered system is really important for me is that we have an unprecedented number of young people that are now on our books in Job Centre Plus, and we want to provide them with the correct amount of help. And I really feel that the way that we do that is to have a young person sitting in front of one of our work coaches to have, you know, a really broad variety of opportunities made available to them. So my absolute vision for this is that a young person, irrespective of their background, irrespective of where they've grown up, their parentage, irrespective of exam results, levels of experience, that there will be something in Kickstart for everything. And so that's why I really think it's so important that we encourage employers of all sizes to get involved in Kickstart, because that is how we then get that diversity of opportunity for the young people in the job centres. So the scheme is open now for applications. We have Kickstart work placements that have already started, which is really good news. And we will be loading, as we go over the next couple of weeks, a significantly increased number of vacancies into what we call the provision service, which is how our work coaches access the referrals and how you as employers will, or gateway organisations will receive those referrals. So we're starting now. The last placements are due to start in December 2021, with the scheme at the moment currently intending to conclude in summer 2022. So DWP, and I'll talk a bit more about this perhaps in the next slot. So DWP will cover the funding for each job, and broadly speaking, that looks like the salary for 25 hours a week, the associated national insurance contributions, and the minimum automatic enrolment pension contribution. So broadly speaking, that I guess is what the Kickstart scheme is. So the next bit I want to talk about then is, well, why should people get involved? What is in it for employers? And I think this is, for me, a really key point. And there's lots of, there's lots of ways that we could look at it, but I'm going to look at it from, I hope anyway, a perspective that chimes. So for me, what this is about is allowing employers and gateway organisations to try something completely new, to benefit from something that you will not have thought about before. You might have thought about it before, but actually for whatever reason you decided that you wouldn't do it. And that for me is the beauty of Kickstart. So it's that giving that business the opportunity to think, well, times have been really tough, let's try something new and innovative, and let's do that in hopefully a relatively risk-free way, because the government will ultimately fund us for these jobs. So I guess a real life example that I will give you, and we might talk about this a bit later down the line, is we saw an organisation come through the Kickstart Approvals Board a couple of weeks back, which was a chain of self-service restaurants in London. Not a particular family name, and I'm not going to say who it was, but it was a fairly large chain of restaurants. And what that employer had said to us was that they'd never considered a situation whereby they would have hosts, customer hosts in the restaurants, because people walked in, they did what they did, and they went out again. So for that organisation, they said to us, look, we see this as a really good example of perhaps trying something new, perhaps a bit of upselling, perhaps all of these sorts of things. And what that organisation also was then able to say to us was, and as a result of doing this, existing employees, we can promote them into supervisory positions, and the business will grow. So for me then, I think that's the real beauty of the scheme. It is about trying something completely new. Now, you don't have to try something completely new. So this isn't DWP saying go off and do, lots of wild and wacky things that may not work. And I'll come on to that a bit later on in terms of, I guess, what that assessment process does actually look like. But I think the real beauty of the scheme is it gives those employers and gateway organisations the chances to try something new. Equally, as I said before, I guess the nuts and bolts of the scheme are around about the fact that 100% of the wages are subsidised at the national minimum wage level, or the national living wage level, depending on the age of the participant, for 25 hours a week, with the employer national insurance and the automatic enrolment contributions funded. In addition to that, for every young person that starts a work placement with an employer, we provide, if you like, a setup fee to reflect the cost of onboarding someone that will, in essence, be a new employee, hopefully a long-term employee, but certainly a young person that will be with you for 6 months. We pay a rate of £1,500, which is a one-off payment for every young person that starts, and that could be to onboard the young person, to provide kit, checks, all of those sorts of things. If an organisation approaches us direct, then we will pay that directly to them, if that makes sense, if they're an employer. If it comes via the gateway, then we would expect the gateway organisation to have the conversation with the employer about what that looks like. So I guess in straight terms, then, that is what's in it for the employers in the scheme. So how then, what does that process look like when an employer wants to try and take on a new young person? So this one's really key then. So it is, I think, certainly in government terms anyway, a relatively easy application process. So it's via gov.uk, and I'm sure we can provide the links for colleagues on the call who are interested in looking at it. The system will ask for a number of, if you like, statements from the organisation confirming some key areas. But once that is out there, then we go into free text, and we will start that assessment, and then sometimes, if we need to, we will get in touch with the applicant organisation, and that happens more often, I think, gateway organisations, but we might get in touch if there's something within that application that we are not absolutely sure about. So to be able to apply for Kickstart, you need to have a role, or roles, obviously, that have been specially created and are additional to the existing organisation. So we call that, within DWP, additionality. The second element that we talk about is that within the work placement and within the application, the applicant needs to be able to demonstrate to us what the work placement will provide to the young person in terms of add-on skills, and we tend to call that employability. Now, we might come on, I guess, to talk a bit, and we will in fact, to talk about, you know, what makes that good application. But in essence, we look at three things when we are assessing a Kickstart bid. We run due diligence checks, so we use a tool called Spotlight, which runs checks against the company. The second thing that we look at, as I said, is that additionality. So are the jobs completely new? And then we look at the employability aspects of it. If, as I said, the applicant wants to apply for 30 or more jobs, then they can come direct to DWP. If it's less than 30, then they come through the gateway organisation, and that, I think, is the second part of the slot today. If the application is approved, the jobs are advertised within the DWP network in the relevant areas, and Job Centre Plus work coaches, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail, perhaps a bit later on, will make referrals for you to those jobs, and then it will be up to you as the employer, or I guess as the gateway organisation, to assess the young person's suitability for those jobs, and I'll touch again on that a bit later on as well, and then hopefully you find a good match with the young person, and hopefully they join you for a really, really fruitful experience. In terms of what you would need if you did want to apply, as I said, if you want to offer more than 30, you can come direct to DWP. Less than 30 is via the gateway. So in essence, there's just a couple of things that you need to get you started in that process. So you need your company number from Companies House, or your Charity Commission number, or your Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator number, if you've got one as well. You need the organisation's address, you need contact details, and you need the details of the role and their locations. And then, as we said, we'll come on to this as well, you then need to be able to provide the information about why these are new roles, and equally how they will develop the employability skills of the young people. So let's talk a little bit then about what a successful application looks like then. So what do you need to do, I guess, to be able to get over that line? So what we then as DWP need to see is that the job placements will give, I guess, a meaningful experience. And I think a strong application is one that's going to outline the roles really clearly, tell us very clearly about what the duties are, the responsibilities and goals, quite frankly. We also ask for confirmation within the application, and this is a really key part, that the Kickstart the young person that's joining the organisation will not either fill jobs that have previously been made, will not fill redundant positions, and will also not cause contractors to suffer a detriment, as in lose hours or anything along that particular line. Now, ultimately, a Kickstart placement, it should be there to increase future chances of gaining work, and it's those sorts of things that we look for in the application as well. Now, if an organisation has made redundancies in the recent past, then that is not an automatic knockout. It doesn't mean that we would automatically say, that young person can't work in that organisation, because we recognise that businesses have and are going through very, very difficult times. And as such, simply because an organisation has made people redundant, then that doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't take a Kickstart person in our view. But what it does mean is that we will look at it carefully, quite frankly. So again, I'll give you another real world example. We had one go through the decision board earlier this week, where the organisation had been very, very upfront about the fact that they had made redundancies, but that they would actually be, that they'd been in more senior positions or in another division. And in those sorts of situations, then I think we would do one of two things. We would either just pass it, and in this situation we did, or we might pick up the phone to the organisation and just say, look, can we have a little bit of a conversation about this, please? Can you tell us what it looks like? So let's then talk a little bit, if we can, just about those two key elements that we talked about, which is the additionality piece, as we talked about, and then the employability support. What does that look like? What are we looking for when we are assessing those jobs? In essence, the applicant needs to be able to demonstrate to us that the roles would not be able to exist without the Kickstart funding. I already said to you, I think, that the jobs can't replace existing or planned vacancies, or cause anyone who is currently employed in the business to lose out. So from my perspective, I guess, I think I'd already given you the example of the self-service restaurant in London, and I think that is a really good example of where we can see something is very clearly additional. But just to be clear, additionality doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be a completely fresh idea, if that makes sense. In essence, it just needs to be over and above the existing headcount, if you see what I mean. So the example that I will give you is that DWP is going through a fairly major recruitment round. As many colleagues will probably know, we're taking on, I think, in excess of 13,000 new work coach colleagues. And in that scenario, then, if we have funding for 13,000 work coaches, and then we want another one work coach, then technically, technically that sort of a position could be a Kickstart opportunity. So hopefully that kind of demonstrates a bit that it doesn't necessarily have to be a completely new idea, but the posts have to be additional to what you have already budgeted, and that needs to be clearly demonstrable. And I guess just this is not official DWP policy in any way, shape or form. I guess it's more of a personal reflection. It is easier to see additionality in the fast food, in the self-service example that I talked about, as opposed perhaps to some of the others. It doesn't mean it's in any way impossible. And we see lots and lots of applications from people that say, look, this is in addition to headcount, these posts are supernumerary, all of these sorts of things. In essence, it just has to be absolutely clear to us when we see it why these jobs are additional. Simple as that. And again, we might come on to perhaps a number, some questions about that as we go through. The second element then that we talk about is what we're calling employability. Now, I can see, well, it's likely perhaps, that I might get some questions on this in terms of the guidance, and perhaps why isn't it a little bit clearer. I think one of the reasons why the guidance isn't that clear is we don't want to put an unreasonable burden on employers that are already hard pushed, if we're being really, really candid. So we see a variety of statements around the employability support. Some are much better than others in terms of their quality, but what we're really looking for here is the intention to provide the young person with something meaningful at the end of the placement. So I think our general hope would obviously be that if the employer and the young person got on really well, that at the end of the 6 months, perhaps there would be a conversation about actually taking the young person on permanently. But if that's not possible, I think the key thing from our perspective is that we want that young person to walk back into the job centre with something that makes them more marketable at the end of the placement as opposed to when they started it. But what that looks like will depend very much, I think, on the nature of the employer. I think it will depend on the size of the employer, the sector, their setup, all of these sorts of things. So from our perspective, things that we will be looking at are help around looking for work, career advice, goal setting, maybe support with putting together a CV, preparing for interview, but it could be much broader than that. It could be around developing skills in the workplace. So again, depending on sectors, we've seen employers that have said, we'll provide the young person with food hygiene certificate training, training to get a food hygiene certificate. There could be any number of things that would sit in there. And as we said, in the early stages of the process, when the young person has started, then the employer will receive £1,500, which in part, as well as reflecting the cost, I guess, of onboarding that young person, it's then intended that will help with any employability support that the organisation wants to provide. That, I guess, is the application process. So if an employer or a gateway goes through, and is successful, then DWP will we will email out with something called the grant funding agreement, because these are grants. And once that is signed, and once we have your vacancies back, then they are loaded into the DWP services, and then work coaches can start making referrals. There is no particular problem if an organisation comes back to us and says, we would like to wait a while, if that makes sense. So if someone applies now and actually are applying for vacancies a bit later down the line, that's absolutely fine. We've no problem with that. There's no, I guess, your vacancies don't expire. So once you've been approved by us, you've been approved. And then if something changes in the makeup of the business, then if you let us know that, then we will do what we can to accommodate that. So don't feel as if you've said, for argument's sake, well, we'd like the vacancies to start in December, then and you suddenly take a decision that you need it past Christmas or whenever, to be honest, then we can obviously help you out with that. Want to come on then just really quickly before we talk about the role of the work coach, and then Elizabeth, I could think that might take us to our 2-minute silence at 11 potentially, and then that gives us a good time for questions, doesn't it? But how do the payments work then? So the payments are relatively straightforward. So the payments do depend on whether the applicant has applied via an employer or a gateway. And there are terms and conditions which are on gov.uk, which lays out how that works. But in essence, the £1,500 setup cost is paid when we have confirmation from the employer that the young person has started the work placement. If the applicant has applied through a gateway, then DWP will pay the gateway that money, and then it's the responsibility of the gateway to have conversations with the employers about how that is passed on. In terms of how the salaries are paid, we will use information from HMRC, so Pay Online, to check that the young person is still employed. And the grant funding to pay the young person's salary is paid monthly in arrears when we know that they are enrolled on the payroll, and we know as well that they're being paid through HMRC. Now, there is absolutely no problem, and we see this with you wanting to pay a young person a bit more, but the funding from DWP will not cover that. That would need to be met via the business. So I want to talk just briefly then, I guess, about the role of the work coach, and then I think that will take us up to 11 o'clock, Elizabeth, if that's okay. So the work coach within this process has, I guess, two roles. And I should have said at the beginning that actually the only gateway, in the more traditional word, rather than gateway DWP speak, but the DWP work coach is the gateway to the employer. And so by that, what we mean is that you will only be able to take people that are referred to you from the job centre. So it might be, and we've seen this, and it's a question I've been asked before, that if a young person is on our books and happens to be aware that a business is enrolled in the Kickstart scheme and approaches the business directly, that doesn't mean you can't see that young person. But what it does mean is they would need to come back via the DWP Universal Credit Work Coach. And the reason for that is at the heart of the universal credit journey is the relationship between the work coach and the customer. And in essence, by that, what we mean is that it is for the DWP work coach to, I guess, conduct that initial assessment of whether the young person is suitable for the vacancy that you guys want us to advertise. So it's really core then that we can have that conversation, knowing the young person's circumstances, knowing the background, and that we can then refer them to the vacancy if we deem that to be suitable. We will not send people cold, so we don't work in this way anyway, but we would not just simply say, well, there's 5 people on this list that they're going to come to that employer, because some of the jobs might have specific requirements, specific skills that have been specified, or aptitude along those particular lines. So on that basis, we will conduct that initial triage, but on the basis that it's an initial triage and ultimately you are the ones offering the work placement, then we will refer probably up to a maximum of 5 young people to every vacancy that you advertise with us. So that gives you enough of an opportunity to conduct an assessment and decide who best fits your organisation. And once your vacancies are filled, then we will close the vacancies on the provision service. So you won't then have a large number of young people that come back to you when you don't have any vacancies. The second element of the work coach journey then is that continued contact with the young person whilst they are still employed with it's still employed, in the work placement. And there's a couple of different elements to that. I guess the first element is that those young people will then, in essence, be in employment, and they will not sit within what we call intensive work search. So there's no requirement for the young person to come into a job centre once a week or something along those lines if they were in that space. But what we do expect, though, is for the work coach to run alongside the young person to spot if there's any problems, and hopefully to address those with you as the employer. Equally, the other element of this is that we are embedding within each of our 34 Job Centre Plus districts single points of contact for Kickstart, and we think that they will also have a role to play in supporting both the young person, but also, perhaps, well, not more importantly, but also with the employers as well, just to make sure that if we are rejecting applications, and we are, because it is a process and that's what we're doing, that actually you've got somewhere to go, have a conversation over and above what we already provide within the rejection letters. For many businesses, I've been very happy to do that as well. So Elizabeth, I'm going to stop there because I think we are nearly on 11, aren't we?